Hey folks, VermiBag tutorials here. Today I'm going to show you how to make this bedding. This is the bedding that I run through all my worm bins. It's basically a combination of shredded paper, shredded newspaper, shredded cardboard, oyster shell dust, alfalfa meal, coconut coir, and some compost to inoculate the system, get the microbes started in it. I'll go through and show you the items that I put in it. So what I add to this is just your typical shredded paper, office paper or stuff you get at home, but I get a lot of it at work, so I just bring the stuff here. It's a fairly coarse shred on this particular machine. I also add shredded newspaper. Rather than ripping your newspapers up into strips, it'll work a lot better if you just run it through a shredder. This happened to go through a micro shredder, so it's really, really fine. I mean, it works really well. I mean, the worms like it a lot. And there's shredded cardboard. Not everybody's going to have access to a shredder that can actually shred cardboard, but a lot of the newer shredders now, the 20-sheet shredders, I mean, they'll handle the smaller Amazon boxes and stuff like that as long as you make them fairly small pieces. If you can afford that, it'll work a lot faster, and the decomposition process will go a lot faster if you have them shredded up fine like that. And back there I got the oyster shells ground up. That acts the same as eggshells. It gives them some type of a grit for their gizzards, and also raises the pH of the system. And then I have alfalfa meal. I have that for the garden, so I just throw a little bit in. It's really high in nitrogen, and it just helps the decomposition process. The last two things I add is coconut coir. I already added the water to this, but this was about 3 pounds, 3.5 pounds of dry coconut coir. As you can tell, I added a lot of water to it. You want to make this excessively wet when you start this mixing process, because you're going to be adding a lot of dry ingredients to this, and so they're going to absorb a lot of water. And the last thing I add is just compost. This came out of my compost bin in the garden. I know there's some worms in there. I can't see them right now, but because it's a lot of castings there actually too. It was just the top layer of the compost bin, but any type of dirt would work. Just something to give the microbes into the system and start the decomposition process. Okay folks, first thing I do is I go ahead and add a little bit of the old bedding that I made in here just as a starter. This here is about probably 2 weeks old, 2.5 weeks. I've had it in 5-gallon buckets out here, and I turn it on occasion, make sure it's real moist, maybe add some coffee grounds to it and stuff. So I'm going to start with that. I got a couple inches in the bottom of it. First thing I'm going to do is add some shredded paper. Then you want to add about the same amount of shredded cardboard. And I'm going to add some coconut coir. Like I said, this is really, really wet. So you need it moist for it can coat that paper and the cardboard. If you throw the paper directly in here without just water, it'll wad up and it'll bundle together and stuff. So you need to add this in, then toss and turn it until the paper gets coated. Once it's coated, it won't stick together. So you're pulling a lot of that material from the bottom up just to coat this paper. Now when you're mixing the cardboard and shredded paper, you want to have at least 50% cardboard. The worms really like cardboard, but paper, white paper, not quite as crazy about that. Add a little more cardboard. Actually, the rest of this. And there's a little paper mixed in with this cardboard. It was already in the shredder when I did it. I'm going to throw some more coconut coir top of here to get this stuff wet. And just continue to mix it. I found this clay tub or whatever works really well, because if I fill this thing about 3/4 of the way full, it'll actually make a really full 5-gallon bucket of bedding. And once I make this bedding, it's going to sit in these 5-gallon buckets for anywhere from a month to a couple months outside here, and I'll rotate them upside down, roll them around a little bit, make sure they stay real moist. And in a month and a half, it'll really start turning into almost a soil. The paper starts to decompose. And you can see this stuff is really coated. I mean, there's coconut coir basically everywhere on this. The paper's well coated. Try and make sure there's no dry spots in here. Then I'm going to go ahead and add just a little bit of oyster shell. Again, that's like eggshells work just fine if you don't have oyster shell powder. Stuff's real cheap. I mean, you can buy like a 6-pound bag of it on Amazon for, I don't remember what it was, but it was probably like less than $10, and it'll probably last, a couple years easily. So mix that item up pretty good. Mix the alfalfa meal in. And add a little bit of this shredded newspaper. Again, this is really neat stuff. I mean, if you take your newspapers and shred them into long strips, they take a fair amount of time to decompose. If you take them running through a micro shredder like this, and they'll decompose in a matter of a couple days. I mean, it's almost like dust, and any shredder will handle newspaper. So just fold it up, make it about 4 or 5 layers thick, and just run it through your shredder. Now see, I'm running out of moisture here a little bit now. It's getting barely damp in here, so I'm going to have to add more. I'm going to add just a little bit more of the coconut coir. So I bought a 10-pound block of coconut coir, and this is the 3rd batch of bedding that I've made with it. So, and I think a 10-pound block was like $15. So you can make an awful lot of bedding for $15. You're going to be making 20 gallons of bedding. But this bedding is not only bedding, it's food. I mean, the worms can live on this stuff directly. So I go through a fair amount of it because every time I feed, I always throw a handful of this on top of the material that I throw into the bin. And now I'm going to add my compost that I got out of the garden, my garden compost. Now if you look at this, it's really, that's basically almost pure worm castings actually. I just went into the outside bin and took a shovelful off the top, but it's full of bacteria and things that are needed to get this system up and running. Now, I'm sure there's going to be some worms in here, but they're going to survive out in these buckets, so once I put them into the bins, I mean, there might be a couple worms in it. The only reason you wouldn't do that is if you have one particular type of worm, like African night crawlers or something, you want to mix them with red wigglers or European night crawlers. Then you're going to want to add a soil. Your inoculation material probably should be free of worm eggs and cocoons. I only saw a couple worms, so there's not too many in there. I'm going to add the rest of this coconut coir, and then we will mix it up a little bit, and then I'll get it in the 5-gallon buckets. Now we're going to transfer the bedding that we have into the 5-gallon buckets. When we do that, we're going to have to add moisture to it because we want this to be real moist inside this bucket. So we'll put a layer in, then we'll spray it down. I use this little garden sprayer. It works really well if you, versus having a little hand sprayer that you have to pump. This works much better. It'll save you a lot of work if you get one of these. So basically layer a little bit soil in there, and make sure it's good and moist. I mean, you want it almost dripping, well, not quite dripping wet, but real moist. This stuff can really start decomposing. Okay. What I'm also going to do is, as I go through the layers, I'm going to add just a little bit more alfalfa meal to each layer. That'll kind of give it a hot spot where it can start decomposing with the nitrogen that's in the alfalfa meal. Just continue to do that. I'm going to fast forward things. You'll see me just adding basically a layer of the new bedding that we got made. I'll sprinkle a little bit of alfalfa meal on it, and then I'm going to wet it down real good. So okay, folks, that's probably as full as I want to do it. That'll give me a little bit of space here, so I can flip the bucket over from time to time. I can roll it just to agitate and mix things up. I'll come in here, I'll show you. Get it. This is what you want to make. It's a really good bedding. Like I said, the worms can basically live on it without any food if you just want to give them this. So folks, this is the final product. It's just a great all-round bedding and food. It's simple to make and your worms will love it. Please visit my website if you'd like to see any other videos that I'm doing. I try and get them up there from time to time. I'll definitely be putting more on in the near future. So from VermiBag.com, VermiBag composting systems. Till next time, ciao.